The opening shot frames Los Angeles at night, an ocean of lights stretching out beneath the ridges of the Hollywood Hills. Among those winding streets and gated driveways lies a property once occupied by Tim Bergling of Avicii. It was more than a home. It was a hybrid. A modern hillside residence fused with a private studio, its walls packed with custom wiring, its lower floor soundproofed and dimly lit, where cables and synths once ran in looping chains. For months after the house changed hands, it stood mostly unused. The new owner was often overseas, relying on property managers to handle upkeep. On paper, the house should have been dormant, quiet, consuming only the base level of electricity needed for security systems and refrigeration. But in September 2023, something broke the pattern. At 10:42 p.m., a property manager reviewing utility records noticed an anomaly. The electricity bill had nearly tripled compared to the same month a year earlier. More alarming was the consumption pattern. Instead of random fluctuations, the bill reflected a repeating surge every night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., a time when the house was empty, alarm system armed, and no maintenance scheduled. The discovery set off a chain of questions. Why was the house pulling power in such concentrated bursts? And why always at the same hours Avicii had been known to work through the night? Floor plans obtained from past real estate filings confirmed the design. A split-level studio residence, with the main living area above and the studio space below, where rows of outlets and hidden conduits were still embedded behind acoustic panels. The surges seemed to originate from that very section of the house, the old studio wiring. Neighbors provided their own observations. One couple living across the canyon recalled seeing a faint pulsing glow from the studio windows even when the house was supposed to be empty. "We thought maybe it was just a timer light," the husband said, "but it looked more like equipment like a monitor or console still running." By November, technicians were called in to investigate. A portable EMF meter, passed along the basement wall where studio racks had once stood, showed periodic spikes, sharp bursts that faded as quickly as they appeared. Nothing stayed long enough to confirm, but enough to be noted in the inspection log. Then came the most curious piece. A locked equipment case tucked into a storage alcove behind the studio wall. Movers had overlooked it before. When opened, it revealed a set of old synth modules, patched together with hardwired cables still connected as though mid-session. For testing, a technician briefly supplied power. The unit responded with a low, looping tone, incomplete, unresolved, almost as if frozen in the middle of a composition. The caretaker noted the time, 2:17 a.m. The strange electricity bills were just the beginning. Once questions were raised, the property managers arranged for an official inspection. On December 14, 2023, at exactly 11 a.m., 2 technicians arrived at the Hollywood Hills house. They parked along the narrow street, where the canyon walls echo sound in ways that confuse distance, and carried in portable instruments, EMF meters, thermal scanners, and a basic power load analyzer. The house itself sat silent under the daylight. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels gave the illusion that the city was spilling directly into the living space, the skyline glittering even in morning haze. The upper floor was sterile, sparsely furnished since the owner rarely stayed there. But the lower level, the old studio floor, felt different. Acoustic panels still clung to the walls, strips of LED track lighting lined the ceiling, and though most gear had been removed, the architecture of sound remained. Empty racks, cable channels, sealed vents, and an array of power outlets built for more than ordinary residential needs. The inspectors began with the main electrical board. Readings showed stable voltage, no dangerous fluctuations. Yet the overnight data log fed directly from the power utility confirmed the surges were real, spiking precisely at 2:03 a.m., 3:16 a.m., and 3:59 a.m., almost like scheduled events. They moved downstairs with the EMF scanner. First, nothing. The air was steady, only the faint hum of the HVAC system. But as one technician approached the far wall where schematics indicated a dedicated circuit once ran to a bank of synthesizers, the device suddenly leapt. The needle swung into the red zone, then dropped. A few seconds later, it repeated, erratic but concentrated on that exact section of wall. The anomaly was logged, photographed, and compared against the floor plan. According to old contractor notes, that wall contained a subpanel installed specifically for high-load audio gear. With most of it removed, it should have been inactive. Yet something was bleeding through. At this stage, the rational explanations were presented on site. First possibility, residual wiring. Custom installations, especially in older studio retrofits, often leave transformers or hidden converters that continue to draw current long after the main gear is gone. Even a single faulty junction could cause phantom loads, explaining the bills. Second possibility, caretaker presence. Though the owner claimed the house sat empty, cleaning staff or maintenance contractors may have entered during those hours, perhaps using equipment or leaving lights on. Logs were incomplete, so the timeline was uncertain. But then came the more unsettling detail. In the storage alcove behind the studio, the locked equipment case was found. Dark, heavy, with flight tags still taped to its side, it bore the marks of repeated travel. Inside, neatly packed in foam, were several obsolete synth modules, cross-wired in a way that looked frozen mid-composition. Patch cables connected outputs to inputs in looping patterns that seemed nonsensical to the untrained eye. When powered briefly, the modules emitted a tone not loud, but resonant, a pulsing sequence that rose and fell irregularly. The technician noted the sound was unlike a test signal. "It's like something unfinished," he murmured. "Like whoever used this walked away before completing the patch." The time of this test? 2:17 a.m. Coincidence, perhaps, or alignment with the unexplained surges. The house, in that moment, felt less like an empty property and more like a place still engaged in some hidden activity. Even the technicians, trained to dismiss anomalies, grew quiet as they logged the results. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The audio test became a quiet turning point. For the first time, there was a tangible output and actual sound emerging from equipment long since considered obsolete and forgotten. The tone lingered in the room, low and steady, filling the hollow studio space like a faint heartbeat. One of the technicians instinctively turned down the volume, though the modules were already set at minimal gain. The sequence seemed to rise and fall of its own accord, not perfectly mechanical, almost as if improvised. The caretaker described it in the report as a pulsing loop, non-rhythmic, incomplete. For a studio once belonging to Avicii, known for layering beats into meticulous crescendos, the implication was uncomfortable. Had the loop been left running for years, unnoticed? Was it merely an unfinished patch? Or was there some residual memory buried in the hardware circuits? The official notes framed it plainly. Observation: obsolete synthesizer modules discovered. Condition wired and patched in a configuration not consistent with standard storage. Result: audio tone emitted when briefly powered. Time recorded 2:17 a.m., December 14, 2023. The timing was emphasized twice in the log. In the weeks following the inspection, the property managers began speaking with neighbors to verify any unusual activity. Most dismissed the idea outright, pointing out that Hollywood Hills houses often reflect and scatter light across canyons in odd ways. One resident, however, recalled something more specific. "We'd sometimes hear faint bass lines, like distant music, but always at night, usually around 2 or 3, she said. "It wasn't loud enough to call anyone about. Felt more like bleed-through, like a car stereo passing in the distance, except it never faded. It just hovered for a while, then stopped." The couple across the canyon added their own memory. They insisted that on October 29, 2023, at exactly 3:30 a.m., they saw the faint glow of monitors through the panoramic glass. "It looked like someone was working in there," the husband explained. "You could see the flicker, the kind of light you only get from a screen. But the owner was overseas, we knew, because their housekeeper mentioned it the next week." Experts were consulted, and explanations were put forward. One argued that old power supplies can retain charge long after disconnection, especially when wired in feedback loops. The modules, if patched incorrectly, might generate oscillations without external input. Another pointed out that the faint music neighbors reported could have originated from nearby hillside events, their sound carrying through the canyons, amplified in strange ways. Both explanations were logical. Both reduced the mystery to quirks of acoustics and electricity. And yet, neither accounted for the persistent time pattern, the fact that so many irregularities aligned between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. The property did have a security system. Cameras covered the driveway, front door, and sections of the interior. When investigators attempted to review recordings from the periods in question, they found an unexpected detail. The footage between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. was consistently corrupted. The files existed, but the video would freeze, pixelate, and drop to black. Audio tracks remained intact, low hiss, occasional clicks. Nothing conclusive, but the visual data was unusable. The security company suggested a common technical fault, condensation in the cable junctions or interference from nearby cell towers. But the caretaker noted that the corruption only occurred during those same hours and nowhere else. Daytime recordings were crystal clear. The gap in the record added weight to the suspicion. The more rational the explanations became, the more the inconsistencies seemed to resist closure. By January 2024, the equipment case was resealed and stored once again. The modules were not removed, nor dismantled. The owner requested no further testing, citing the risk of damaging old circuits. The technicians, though uneasy, complied. The case sat in the alcove, covered with a dust sheet, as though waiting. The nightly surges continued. Bills reflected the same strange consumption patterns. Neighbors still reported the occasional glow. And though nothing was categorically proven, those who walked the studio floor after dark described a similar sensation. That the air in the lower level carried a presence of sound, not audible but felt, like a vibration beneath the threshold of hearing. By the beginning of 2024, the story of the house had moved beyond numbers on a utility bill or lines in an inspection log. It had become a timeline, pattern. Every anomaly, from the humming modules to the corrupted camera files, fell within the same narrow window of time, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. When property managers returned to the site in late January, they deliberately scheduled their visit for those hours. They arrived just before 2, their headlights bouncing off the narrow, twisting road that wound through the canyon. The city below shimmered with its usual pulse, a sea of lights that gave the impression of life continuing uninterrupted. But as they stepped into the house, the silence was absolute. The upper level was sterile in the glow of a single security lamp. A couch, untouched. A kitchen, polished but unused. It was only as they descended to the studio level that the sense of expectation thickened. The walls, padded with old acoustic panels, seemed to close in, muffling footsteps until every breath felt amplified. The case remained where it had been left, sealed, dust sheet draped across it. No equipment ran, no lights blinked. Yet the atmosphere suggested otherwise, as though something unseen was already in motion. At 2:11 a.m., one of the managers noted a faint shift in the room temperature. The HVAC system was inactive, yet the air felt denser, as if pressure had dropped slightly. They logged the detail, dismissing it as canyon winds pushing through vent gaps. But at 2:17 a.m., the same time previously logged during the equipment test, a low sound began to stir. Not a tone, not music, but a vibration barely audible, sensed more in the body than in the ear. The caretaker described it later as the room holding its breath. They moved quickly to the breaker panel, half expecting to find a system activating on its own. But the board was quiet, circuits stable. No switches moved. No lights indicated a load. Still, the vibration lingered, steady enough to rattle a thin metal vent cover fixed high on the wall. They captured the sound on a handheld recorder. Faint, but present, a pulsing hum without rhythm or decay. The recording was played back the following morning. Stripped of the tension of the moment, it sounded innocuous, like distant roadwork or a low engine idling somewhere beyond the canyon. Rational explanations returned easily. Sound bouncing through the hills, amplified by the acoustics of glass and concrete. Yet, in the silence of the studio that night, the origin had felt much closer. The security system provided its own complication. Footage from the interior cameras, reviewed afterward, again showed clear recordings up until exactly 2 a.m. At that moment, the files pixelated, froze, and then cut to black. Audio hissed faintly until 4 a.m., after which both picture and sound resumed as if nothing had occurred. A technician from the security company explained it as signal interference, the kind that can occur when nearby transmitters flood the spectrum. But when pressed, he admitted such interference usually appeared intermittently, not on a repeating schedule tied to the same 2-hour window every night. He could not explain why the corruption affected every camera simultaneously, yet only between those hours. Weeks later, in early February, a neighbor produced something unexpected. Sorting through old papers, she found a handwritten note that had been left in her mailbox years earlier, while Avicii still lived in the house. It was unsigned, written in a hurried scrawl. "Apologies if you hear music late. Hours between 2 and 4 are when I can work without calls or interruptions. Please let me know if it's ever too much." The note was ordinary in tone, polite even, but its timestamp aligned almost perfectly with the anomalies still unfolding years later. The very hours that had once been his preferred working window had become the hours of unexplained activity in a supposedly silent house. Engineers brought in by the current owner stressed caution in interpretation. They pointed out that audio equipment, especially analog synths, can behave unpredictably when left in feedback loops. Modules patched incorrectly can generate oscillations that self-perpetuate, even feeding back into the wiring of a house if connected improperly. Over years, such circuits could act almost like mechanical habits, switching on and off with fluctuations in power supply. Skeptics reinforced that Hollywood Hills homes often suffer from line noise due to aging infrastructure. Surges, corrupted footage, even faint vibrations could all be traced back to a combination of environmental and electrical interference. And yet, the consistency remained. Always between 2 and 4. Always aligned with Avicii's noted working hours. Always focused in the same room, the studio space overlooking the vast city lights. By March, the property's management decided to limit night inspections. Staff admitted privately that walking the studio between those hours had become psychologically heavy. One caretaker described the sensation in detail. "It's not frightening exactly, just occupied, like walking into a room where someone just left, except there's no sign of them. You feel it in the air before you even notice the sound." The reports stopped short of drawing conclusions. No one claimed anything beyond what was measurable. But the alignment of bills, logs, corrupted files, and lived impressions left the story hovering in the same state as the unfinished loop still sitting in the sealed equipment case unresolved, incomplete, pulsing quietly in the background. By the spring of 2024, the narrative surrounding the Hollywood Hills property had reached a point of quiet stalemate. Every inspection, every note, and every recollection had built a case that was at once rich in detail and frustratingly elusive. The managers who oversaw the home stopped scheduling midnight visits, not because they feared what they might encounter, but because each time seemed to repeat the same cycle: power surges logged on the utility accounts, corrupted security footage, faint vibrations in the studio, and the subtle but undeniable sense of presence. The evidence, laid out chronologically, created a story that felt too deliberate to dismiss. September 2023, utility bills spike without explanation, showing repeated surges between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. October 2023, neighbors report seeing faint monitor-like glows, despite the house standing empty. December 2023, technicians discover and briefly power an old case of synth modules, producing a looping, incomplete tone recorded at precisely 2:17 a.m. January 2024, a night inspection confirms the sensation of vibration in the studio, despite no load on the breaker panel. Ongoing security footage continues to fail during the same 2-hour window, while audio logs capture nothing more than hisses and clicks. February 2024. A neighbor produces an old note from Avicii himself, apologizing for his work hours always between 2 and 4. Each piece, taken individually, had a rational explanation. The surges could be faulty wiring. The glows could be reflections. The tones nothing more than an old patch wired incorrectly, feeding back on itself. The camera failures could be technical corruption. Even the neighbor's memories could be influenced by hindsight, colored by the knowledge of who had once lived there. But the alignment of details timestamped, layered across accounts, logs, and observations created a pattern that resisted easy dismissal. Two rational explanations. The studio's wiring was unusually complex. Audio circuits, power lines, and hidden conduits ran through the walls, many installed outside normal residential code. When left unused, they may have created phantom loads, unpredictable oscillations, and interference that disrupted the cameras. Synth modules, especially when patched in feedback loops, are known to produce tones without external input. To an engineer, the hums, loops, and surges could all be explained as the quirks of aging, poorly isolated equipment. Caretaker activity and environmental factors could explain the rest. Hillside homes reflect and amplify sound in odd ways, making distant music seem as if it comes from within. Security staff or cleaners may have entered at unusual hours, unintentionally creating the impression of unseen presence. Even temperature shifts and the hum of city infrastructure can affect perception during the quietest hours of the night. And yet, one detail held out of reach: the consistency of time. Every measurable event, bills, surges, corrupted footage, audio anomalies occurred between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. It was the very window once acknowledged by Avicii himself as his working hours, the period he described in his handwritten note as the only time he could focus without interruption. No inspection, no log, and no technical explanation accounted for why a house left silent still seemed to obey that old schedule. By April 2024, the case file prepared by the management team concluded with a cautious line. The property exhibits irregularities consistent with residual wiring loads, environmental interference, and perception bias. However, recurring time-bound anomalies remain without full explanation. Further investigation not recommended unless conditions escalate. The synth case remains sealed in its alcove, its looping circuits untouched. The bills continue to fluctuate, though less dramatically as breakers are gradually replaced. The house stands, overlooking Los Angeles, its glass walls reflecting the endless grid of lights. What can be proved is clear enough. There is no definitive evidence of anything beyond faulty wiring, overlooked equipment, and the quirks of a hillside home. What remains unclear is subtler but harder to shake. Why the hours between 2 and 4 still seem to belong to someone else. And so, the story of Avicii's former Hollywood Hills studio ends not with revelation, but with the same unfinished sequence that played through his synths and echo without resolution, suspended somewhere between explanation and mystery. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.